My name is Gavin Waymire. I'm recording this podcast-style interview for ASB 383, Religion and Sports, under Professor Shoemaker at ASU. I'm joined today by one of my personally favorite professional athletes, Phoenix Rising Football Club defender, Joey Farrell. Joey, how are you doing today?
Feeling good. Done training. Got a nice little nap in, and I'm ready to share with you whatever you need to know.
Yeah, Joey very kindly took some time out of his preseason schedule to talk to me today, so very grateful to have you here. I think we can get right into the discussion. So first of all, this is kind of a couple of broad questions that I'll come back to later in the discussion. So obviously you've done well to make a career out of a sport you must obviously love. So I kind of wanted to talk about, what does football mean to you, on a personal level, obviously outside of being your career? Why is it so special to you?
Well, that's a great question. And it really, for me, football it's everything. It's life, it's family, it's traveling, it's experiences. Because for me, playing this game has brought me so many close friends that I wouldn't have had without playing on the same team as them or playing against them or things along those lines. It has taken me on trips. I've gone to with Phoenix Rising, I went to Ecuador. As a youth, I went to Italy twice. I went to Rome. I went to Milan. I travel across the United States. I've been to just about every state, and that's mostly because of soccer. I haven't necessarily traveled because of just vacation time my whole life. Every time I travel, it's typically tied in with a soccer game or a soccer tournament or something along those lines. And with that as well, family. Like I said, my dad was a college soccer coach. All my older siblings played college soccer, played soccer growing up, and I was the youngest sibling. So from the moment I could walk, I essentially was at soccer games. I had a soccer ball in my either in my arms or by my feet. So for me, it's been a long journey, and thankfully I'm able to continue to play and kind of chase my dreams and continue to play the game that I've been playing since 2-3 years old. So it's really awesome, and it's something that keeps me humble and keeps me driven. So I'm grateful for the game, and I want to continue as long as I can.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes, football, it's the beautiful game. You can experience so much from it. There's so many cultural aspects built into that. You talked about family, all the friends you've made, all the places you've gone. That kind of leads into the next question. So this course that this assignment is for is a course called Religion and Sports. So when you think about that, you might think of it's like theology, somehow incorporating that. It's not really on that level. It's more of how religion and sport kind of fulfill a similar sociocultural niche. So if you look, start of the 20th century, religion has kind of declined a little bit as far as its importance in society. And since then, organized sports is kind of a new phenomenon that's come up. So I was going to, talk to you about, you personally identify with that sort of concept, if it's anything you've thought about before. I know for me as a fan, I notice a lot of the same similarities, even with, Banditos, the stuff that we do together, the culture that we've established, and, the platform that we use to kind of share what we stand for. I don't know if there's any ways that you think your sport of football or soccer can kind of be connected to that line of thinking.
Absolutely, yeah. I would say religion and sport are very, very similar. They align both players, fans, coaches, all with similar character values and disciplines, and they require you to, in good moments and bad, have faith that your team or your teammates or whatever or your religion, let's say, that even in good moments and bad moments, that you guys will be all right. You guys will, as long as you stick together, as long as you continue to pray or continue to practice or do something along those lines, that it will be all right. And with that, it's kind of just that sentiment of faith and having played soccer my whole life and also being a Catholic. I'm not as Catholic as my parents probably wish I was, but I still am a Catholic. And I believe that the lines of discipline and character values and doing the right thing, both in religion and in life and in sport, all helps you along the way to become the person that you want to be. So I think that's very important. And I think it's a unique comparison, comparing religion and sport, but I think it's a one that is very valuable. And I know for me, without sport, there would have been a lot of times in high school where I would have gone to like parties or something. But it just so happened that I had a game on Saturday, so I wasn't going to the party with my friends. I was staying at home and kind of staying out of trouble. And I know that's the same for tons of people, especially in some sports like basketball and just some, or even in soccer in some of the countries like South America or in Africa, where it's kind of that poverty line, and it's sport is kind of the out for people, and it gives them that discipline. It gives them the character values to make a better life for themselves. And I think religion does the same thing. It allows people to come from all walks of life and make something of their life. So I think it is an important comparison to make, and I think it's a pretty interesting course that you're in.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of really touched on a lot of the major topics we've talked about. So great response to that. And now kind of moving into the main premise of this kind of discussion we're having, athletics in the pandemic. Obviously, it's been a really hard year for everybody. All of our lives have been turned upside down, but especially for athletes, you guys have kind of been, everybody wants you to continue, a beacon of light for a lot of people, but that has had to mean you guys had to change your lives a lot to be safe. So the first question I have, COVID related, is what are some of the ways that the pandemic has affected your, usual routine as an athlete, like your day-to-day life?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm thankful now that we're somewhat back to normal, somewhat resembling what life was before the pandemic. But it was tough. Thinking back to last year, there were so many changes that were made. There was so many down periods where we were not practicing, not doing anything, and we were just home in our apartments for 3 weeks at a time, 4 weeks at a time. And that's something that not many athletes do, is take 3 to 4 weeks off and just not do anything. So to handle that, we were kind of doing some at-home workouts, but you could only get as much of it as really you have at home. So you couldn't be lifting, you couldn't really be running too well, you couldn't be necessarily playing outside and doing things like that. And I'm not the odd case on the team, where I've been playing since 3 or 4 years old. Everyone on my team has been playing since a toddler, since a youth. So last year was probably the first year where many of us kind of took that mid-season break, where we had just finished preseason. We had just started our first game, and then boom, the world stops, and all of our training stops, and going to practice, all of our routines stop. So it was hard, and I think mentally more than anything, you have to find ways to stay sharp and continue to develop yourself, both for the game and both for life. So it was definitely a unique experience last year. And then coming back to training, where we could only train at the start we could only train when we first re-entered, it was only 3 people sessions. So you couldn't really do much of the session anyway, rather than the full team. So we missed a lot of the full team experiences, where you're just in the locker room, you're hanging out, or even just traveling was so much different. So last year we were in separate rooms when we would travel. We would travel, if it was a bus ride, we'd have 2 buses. So we'd be spread out. So half the team would be on one bus experiencing one thing, the other half of the team on another bus experiencing one thing. So it kind of messed with the unity of the team a little bit, where typically we see each other every day for about 200 days straight for a season. Last year it was something completely different. So Definitely something tough, but I'm glad to be through it and glad to be on the other side of it now. And hopefully we can kind of continue to get back to life as normal.
So, I mean, I guess kind of leads into the next question. You might have already touched on it. Do you think was the hardest change? I mean, you've talked about not being able to see your teammates, not being able to, stay physically sharp. What was the hardest thing for you?
Yeah, one of the hardest things is we just didn't know when we were going to get back started. So it was tough to kind of stay motivated in that. And this is probably in April of last year, when COVID first has like really come to America and the USL shut down. We didn't know how long we were going to be out there. We didn't know if we were going to see our families for the next 8 months or so. I had families who had my entire family. They all had trips planned to come out. They all had to cancel their trip. So we were truly isolated with only our teammates around, and we couldn't really even see all of our teammates at times. So it was that was definitely challenging, and staying mentally prepared and just ready for anything and motivated was probably one of the toughest things. Whether it's training or when we first returned to playing games, there was no fans in the stands for a long time. So it's almost when you're playing a game that's typically a high pressure game and under the lights, and there's 7,000, 8,000 people cheering you on. It's so motivating for an athlete, and it's what we live for. It's what we look for every night. It gives us chills. It gives us that energy boost. And now we're playing official games with no fans during the day, and it was almost like we were still just practicing. So it was definitely a tough year, and I think the toughest part of it was to stay motivated as we typically would, but we had to find a way to push through.
Yeah, I mean, not having fans, that's one of the biggest things for all of sports, but especially for, football, because the fan culture is such a big part of it. I mean, it was almost like, even for me, even now when you watch games on TV, it's like watching, to stick with the religious analogy, it's like watching a sermon in front of an empty gallery. It's just a really weird environment. So I could definitely imagine that made things difficult. For my next question, again, you already kind of touched on it. How did any of those precautions you had to take safety wise, because I'm sure the team wanted to keep you guys healthy, how did that affect your personal life, with family, friends? You kind of touched on the family, but is there anything else you have to say about that?
Yeah, it was tough, because obviously none of us could really see family. We couldn't fly home, or we couldn't have anyone come visit us, really, because no one could really travel or get on planes. For me, it was tough, but I know for the European guys, it was incredibly tough. Speaking on like the English or the Spanish guys, or even the guys from Africa, when they get home from training, we're typically home from training around noon or 1 p.m. But at that time, it's already 7 p.m. in England or 8 p.m. in Ghana. So their families are preparing to go to sleep. So they only have 1 hour to communicate with their family. Right after a training session, when you're exhausted, they'd have to call their family right away. And that's the only time that they could really speak to their family, who are miles and miles away. I at least so I'm from the East Coast, Philadelphia. So it was a 3-hour time difference. So I could go home, and I would have the 5 to 6 hour window where I could contact my family and communicate with my family before they go to sleep. So it was definitely tough, and that's kind of for athletes. I know family and fans are always kind of those pillars that keep us going and keep us motivated when we're not doubting ourselves, but a little hard on our luck or fighting off an injury or doing something like that. It's our family, our fans, that are the ones that we kind of really do it for in those moments. So not having those pillars of support kind of tested our will to play, and how much we really love the game and to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely something people kind of forget about is with, athletes, it's almost you forget that these are people too. They have families, they have friends, all that stuff. So it was tough for everybody last year, but I couldn't even imagine for you guys basically being on lockdown. You know,
Mm-hmm.
must have been incredibly hard. Um, so for my next question, kind of leads back to the first couple you answered, which are kind of the broad, what does football mean to you? Do you think there's a religious connection? Has the pandemic made football any less fulfilling than what you described in your first two questions? So how did the pandemic affect that, if at all?
Well, I would say there were lulls in the season last year where I was less motivated than I typically am, and I know that goes for a lot of guys. Because just last year it was so stressful and so taxing, not knowing when we'd see our family next, not knowing when we'd play our next game, and things along those lines. It was taxing, and I know a fair amount of guys who were good players, and they went through last year, and then they decided that was their last year playing. That it was almost too taxing for them, and they just wanted to be around family. They wanted to kind of settle down a little bit more. So yeah, it was definitely it was a test of our wills, and it was definitely one of the most challenging seasons. I mean, it was one of the most challenging years for everyone involved. Everyone on this planet had to deal with some sort of stresses and some sort of uncertainty. So having made it through that year, I still have the same passion that I have for football my whole life. But there were lulls during last year where there were moments where I was not nearly as motivated to do a home workout or go for a run on my own or do some of the small things that athletes are needing to do to keep their bodies ready to play at any moment. So I'm glad 2020 is over, and I'm glad we're starting to see a little progress in the numbers dropping and some of the vaccines and some of those things, and returning back to normal and playing in front of, I believe we're opening in front of 50% fans, which will be awesome. Yeah. So I'm really pumped to kind of get back to just the game that I've loved my whole life. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think everybody's looking forward to that. I know us supporters, I was just working with some of the guys on the TIFO for the first game last week. We're all super pumped up because it's also been a really long off season. So it's just everything's been kind of pushed back by all this. So now moving towards just kind of more of a reflection on what we've talked about, wrapping things up a little bit. How has the pandemic changed your perspective on life as an athlete? And if so, in what way?
I believe it's made me grateful for some of the small things, even just training every day. Because there were periods last year where we were just stuck in our apartments for so long that felt like we were losing our minds. So it definitely makes me grateful for the little things. Any chance I get to see family, any chance I get to play in front of a packed house or a full stadium or even a 50% full stadium, I'm going to take full advantage of. And it's just having the gratitude that as athletes, we've always kind of been taught to have the gratitude of every day of training, and every game is important because in any moment you could theoretically get injured and your career can end. So we've always been taught to have that gratitude towards that. But last year, even without injury, everyone's season came to a screeching halt. And it kind of tested people to see where their values lied and how much they really wanted it and how much they truly love not only the game, but how much joy the game brings them and brings to their life. Yeah, with the pandemic, it was just a test of will, honestly. But I'm glad that we're back almost.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great response. You actually answered the last question within that one, so I think that's a great place to wrap up. Joey, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always, and can't wait to get the season started and see you out on the field April 30th.
Absolutely. I appreciate you, Gavin.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too, man.
See ya.